For the past 10 years, I've been researching and advising on happiness and engagement, working with governments such as the UK, UAE and Oman, companies such as BP and Aramco, and bodies such as the CIPD and the Chartered Management Institute. My research, summarised in this last book, identified three major perspectives and, more importantly, a potential solution to one of the most intractable issues faced by organisations and their people worldwide. The first new perspective is that there is a distinct difference between active and passive types of happiness, and it's important to distinguish the actions or programs that might impact one or the other. A person with low levels of passive happiness could be described as sad or anxious. A person with high levels of passive happiness or well-being could be seen as contented, at peace or coping. And Headspace is a great example of the help that's available for people in this area. Now, you could have a person with low levels of active happiness. They would be angry or upset. A person with high levels of active happiness would be energized, enthused or engaged. And if we introduce an axis for time, very short-term versions of these categories are described as mood or technically affect. But ideally, of course, we'd have high levels of well-being and mental energy over time. Enthuse, or whatever it ends up being called, focuses on helping the individual maximize their enthusiasm and engagement. But first, it's interesting to see the incredible impact that happiness, and in particular the active form of happiness such as engagement, can have on individuals and companies and society. In particular, employee engagement is recognised as a major factor in organisational success and is regularly cited in senior leaders' top 5 issues worldwide. But, worldwide, very few people are happy and especially engaged. So why is this? The main causes of high and low happiness and engagement are not the material factors that are typically focused on, like living conditions, pay and so on. In fact, the two most important factors are other people, and in companies that's the immediate leader, and myself, or more specifically my own propensity for enthusiasm, which we'll discuss. So what can I do to maximise my own happiness and my own propensity for enthusiasm? Well, here I'd like to introduce Blob and Rocket. We all know someone like Rocket, who's always enthusiastic, always sees the positive, and is always optimistic. But we all also know someone like poor old Blob, who's usually pretty flat, usually sees the negative, and is most often pessimistic, very often about themselves. And it turns out this way of seeing the world is a style which the person uses to interpret things that have and will happen. This is called their attribution style, and has been researched and successfully applied in fields such as depression and positive psychology for many years, and forms the basis, for example, of cognitive behavioural therapy. But it turns out it can also be applied to everyday situations and our own personal mental energy and enthusiasm. The way it works is easy to explain. Supposing they both had an interview. As in many situations, we often don't have many facts about why this might have happened, so we use our unconscious attribution style to try and explain it to ourselves. Rocket will tend to explain why this happened by applying her positive attribution style. She'll explain or attribute the cause as being something that won't impact future events or other types of situations and isn't some fundamental issue with her. For example, she might think it was a bad interviewer, or she had a cold, or perhaps the job wasn't for her. That's called a positive attribution style. Blob, on the other hand, will tend to explain it as something that affects future interviews and other situations and is something wrong with him. I'm not good with people, I'm unlucky, or even I'm stupid, and that's called a negative attribution style. The good news is that this style is not mostly genetic or a fundamental part of personality. It's a learnt behaviour from childhood and can be relearned. So what's the point of it? Well, we have to understand things that happen, especially negative things, so we know how to act in the future. Most of the time we don't actually know why things went wrong, so we develop this general theory of cause, which we often deploy even when there's evidence to the contrary. For example, if Blob had a letter saying he'd done really well, but the vacancy had been cancelled, he might still feel it's something about him. Now, this theory can be wrong in many situations, and it can drive unhelpful feelings and behaviours. And it turns out it's actually more useful to have a slightly inaccurate positive attribution style. And sadly, of course, this learning is self-reinforcing. If Blob goes for an interview thinking he's stupid or terrible at interviews, then he's likely to do badly, so his attribution is reinforced for next time. If Rocket goes along thinking she's fine, and last time was just a blip, then she'll likely do better, and her positive style is reinforced, and this is how the style develops from childhood. So the good news is that anyone can develop a more positive attribution style and a greater propensity for enthusiasm and engagement. But how? In clinical settings, we might use cognitive behavioural therapy, which can be a long process, but for everyday situations, we can use simpler and quicker techniques. And I've illustrated this with the possible flow of an app. So first, the person assesses their own state of mind using 3 simple sliders. The top one's a standard overall happiness measure. If they score less than 10 out of 20 on the bottom 2 sliders, the app opens an action page. This is a condensed version of an attribution style intervention. The person thinks about the situation its causes, and the main action is to think of 3 alternative explanations. The act of considering other explanations is the main driver of an improved attribution style. The app also allows the individual to consider solutions and actions. These actions are measured and reported in the app to encourage keeping up with a daily target, like a Fitbit. And lastly, the app could include some well-researched, more general actions an individual can take to improve general happiness, and again, these could be scored. And of course, behind the app, there'll be lots of further information, links for headspace, videos, advice on serious issues, games, or whatever. In a corporate setting, the app could also be tailored to be used as a daily engagement assessment tool, a gold standard in engagement, which has been achieved by no companies that I know of. Thanks for your attention. I hope it's helped.